So okay. Hey everyone, I'm gonna pretend we haven't been talking for the past 5 minutes. Welcome to our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion workshop. Alexis, if you wanna click.
There you go.
Okay, so I'm Rachel Zhang. I'll be going over diversity.
And I'm Brandon Orick. I will be covering equity.
And I'm Alexis Henry, and I'll do inclusion. What the?
Good job, Alexis. Okay, so first we're gonna go over the general definition of diversity, which is the condition of having or being composed of differing elements, especially the inclusion of different types of people, such as people of different races or cultures in a group or organization. Okay, so the types of diversity that we're going to be going over are racial, gender, sexuality, and ability. And I just want to give a quick disclaimer. The point of this workshop is really to answer some questions that sometimes people feel uncomfortable about, or they just never, thought to ask because they were unaware of it. So if you guys have any questions, just type them in the Q&A. We're not really going to be monitoring the chat because I assume it's going to blow up again. So with any questions, we can answer them at the end with the Q&A. So first of all, I want to cover what tolerance is, because in order to really, promote diversity and be able to encompass it, you need to have tolerance. So what tolerance is: the respect, acceptance, and appreciation for the rich diversity of our world's cultures, our forms of expression, and ways of being human. So the importance of tolerance: it really promotes openness and respect by demonstrating empathy and compassion through your words and actions towards groups of people. It can honor traditions, and you can also learn about other people's traditions as well. And it helps you gain experiences with diverse populations. Something I didn't mention on this slide, because I think when we're talking about diversity and tolerance, you should really just want to do it to be a good person. But if you want to get into the nitty-gritty, there are literally studies that show that having diversity in an organization, a workplace, or just in your general environment promotes creativity, promotes perspectives. Because if you have people from different backgrounds, obviously it's not going to become an echo chamber. You're going to have a lot more of a range when it comes to getting things done. So the three main ways that I usually go about telling people how to be tolerant is with direct contact. It's better to educate rather than hate. This is something I still need to work on. You also want to thoroughly explain your point of view, because oftentimes we assume what the other person thinks without really learning what it is. Also, guys, especially in our current environment, please consider the environment you're in when you are directly confronting or talking to someone. Sometimes it's better to just play it safe and make sure you're in a place where your safety won't be compromised. Next is spreading awareness. Talk about things that aren't usually reported on the media. I think Generation Z is really good about doing this, because we don't just say it in person, we do it on social media, we do it in our sleep. Posting flyers and updates on the stories you're following is a really good thing too, to spread awareness. I know sometimes it can get really repetitive, but at the end of the day, it's promoting a good cause, so try not to hate on it. And then the last thing is your listening skills. Try to be as unbiased as possible and open-minded. I know, especially in our very polarized country right now, you feel like you have to take a hard-lining stance, but sometimes you just need to hear what the other person has to say, and then maybe you can disagree with them. Try not to interrupt when you're having a genuine conversation with someone. It makes the other person feel disrespected, and it's just going to put up an even bigger wall between you two. And last of all, just try to understand where they're coming from. Try, emphasis on try. Okay, next slide. Okay, so now we're going to be going over the differences in race, ethnicity, and nationality. I know that these sometimes are used interchangeably, but these are three different things. So for the term race, it's your physical characteristics that define a person as being part of a member of a specific group. So some examples of these characteristics would be skin color, hair color and texture, eye color, facial features, and the build of your body. Ethnicity is the cultural characteristics that define a person as being a member of a specific group. So this is language, accent, religion, style of dress, hairstyles, etc. and nationality is the legal sense of belonging to a specific political nation state. So this is your citizenship, nothing more, nothing less. So now we're going to be going over race versus ethnicity because I feel like this is oftentimes misconstrued. And keep in mind, I remember when I first looked at this graphic, I was kind of caught off guard because I was like, some of these don't really like line up in my head, but keep in mind that this is just a sample of the different races and ethnicities in the United States. This differs in every single country. This graph wouldn't look the same for an area in Europe. And our modern concepts of race are all based off of the colonial times, and we've just kind of extended it into current day. So that is something you need to consider when you're talking about race and ethnicity. So I'm not going to go through this whole thing because that will take up too much time, but something I do want to point out is don't be afraid to say the word Black when talking about the Black community. I know that before I really started educating myself, I thought saying the word Black was like, you know, oh, I can't call someone Black, but it's not a bad word. And it's, as you can see from this chart, it's encompassing a group of people. Some people they'd rather just be completely associated with like, oh, I'm African-American, and they'd rather not be called Black. So if you do have questions on how to refer to someone, just ask them. I think they'd much rather have you ask them, and so you can learn about it and be educated and treat them properly rather than you just like being scared and silent about it. Okay, so next we're going to be talking about gender. And so gender identity is how a person feels and who they know themselves to be when it comes to their gender. There are many different gender identities, including male, female, transgender, gender neutral, non-binary, agender, pangender, gender queer, two-spirit. Okay, so there's a lot. Just read the slide. And it varies a lot. And so now moving on, we're going to be talking about pronouns because I think pronouns is a really important thing to cover. And again, sometimes people feel like uncomfortable asking, but something I just really want you guys to know is that, again, don't be afraid to ask what someone's pronouns are. My pronouns are she, her, hers. We were supposed to say this at the beginning, but, you know, normalize using pronouns. So people who, you know, kind of were built in a, grew up in a society where they feel like they shouldn't really talk about it, feel comfortable with saying their pronouns. And so if you just look at this chart here, it shows you the proper usage. Pronouns are the way people decide how they identify and how they express their gender. And however you decide to identify deserves to be respected and supported. And for me, you know, as a cisgender woman, you know, I'm just here to be an ally. And so anytime that there's a need to be educated, just be open-minded. Okay, so now we're going to be talking about the LGBTQIA+ community. So this is an abbreviation for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender, but the QIA+ refers to like the groups of people who, you know, haven't really fully classified themselves, but, you know, are still part of this community. And it used to just be LGBT, but in order to encompass more people, more communities are using LGBTQIA+. And this is in order to be as inclusive as possible. So now I want to talk about why it's important to be an ally. I think oftentimes when we talk about diversity, people kind of pick and choose what kind of diversity they have. And as well as I know for some people, they feel like if they're not explicitly a part of the community, that they can't, you know, promote, you know, inclusion or promote, you know, like Pride Month or something like that. And we really need to destigmatize that. It's really important that you don't necessarily need to be in part of one of these groups in order to advocate for, you know, their equality and equity and just supporting them in general. So me, as a straight cis woman, my job is here to learn from these communities as well as to understand their stories and, you know, help dismantle the discrimination and oppression against these people and, you know, really recognize it as a social justice issue. So now we're going to be moving on to working with people with disabilities and destigmatizing disabilities in general. So just a quick definition, an intellectual disability or ID is a term used when a person has certain limitations in cognitive functioning and skills, which, you know, includes communication, social and self-care skills. Disabilities, I just want to say, are not something to be ashamed of. I feel like people kind of try not to bring it up, but it's nothing that an individual should be ashamed of having. It's just a part of some people's everyday life. Instead of ignoring it and pretending it doesn't exist, we should listen, learn, and support those with disabilities. Okay, so now I want to give a quick definition of ableism. This is just the pervasive system of discrimination and exclusion that oppresses people who are differently abled, including differences in mental, cognitive, emotional, and/or physical abilities through attitudes, actions, or institutional policies. And so now I just want to give a quick overview of how to speak with people with disabilities, because I feel like if you educate yourself on this, it's going to make things a lot more easier, and it's going to make inclusion a lot more possible. So I actually work with Special Olympics Minnesota, and these tips are all taken from their website. So the first step in learning how to communicate with respect, compassion, and care. So whether you're in a professional environment or just having a personal conversation, consider these basic rules for communicating with a person with an intellectual disability. And this quote that I really like from the website is just, people with disabilities are just like everyone else. They just want to be treated fairly and respectfully. Okay, so these are some good guidelines. First is use clear, simplified language and try speaking slower, not louder. Treat them as you would your peers. Again, they're people. Make sure to draw boundaries. I think oftentimes, since people feel like they don't know how to handle this situation, they just kind of stand there, but they're humans. They know how to respond. Make sure you draw boundaries with them, just as you would treat a normal kid, and giving them boundaries like, no, you can't do that. You can do the same thing. Just make sure you consider everything else. Ask them for their thoughts and allow them to answer. Before going out to help them with every single little thing, ask if you can help them, because again, we want to respect boundaries. Expect to get a lot of questions. They usually ask a lot of questions and have less of a filter. Be sure to have fun when you're interacting and enjoy their candor, and make sure to be enthusiastic, upbeat, and professional, and you'll have a really fun time working with them. Okay, and so the last few things I want to really cover, this is something I'm passionate about, is person-first language. And this isn't just for people with disabilities. This is, this can encompass a lot of things. So instead of saying a disabled or handicapped person, we want to say a person with a disability. And you can read the rest of the chart. But the point of person-first language is so you don't make the disability the entire person. There's a lot more to them than just their disability. And although having a disability isn't something to be ashamed of, and you should feel comfortable talking about it, you don't want to make them feel like their disability is all that they are. So that's the importance of person-first language. I highly recommend that you read up on it a little bit.
Okay. So first things first, a quick definition of inclusion. This is the act or practice of being included and accommodating people who have historically been excluded. So this definition includes people of different races, genders, sexualities, and abilities. Okay. So this is what inclusion looks like. So it's embracing and respecting people's differences, and this starts with recognizing them. And a lot of the times we hear things where people say they don't see differences, and it's more so seeing the difference is the first step to embracing and respecting them. Upholding civil rights, that just basically includes equal opportunities and treatment of people. Like Rachel said, even though we are different, everybody is still human. Actively promoting unconditional acceptance by highlighting diverse members and promoting holidays and events pertaining to diverse communities. So this would be highlighting events, holidays, things like Juneteenth, like Rachel said, Pride Month, and just promoting acceptance and diversity. Second to last, creating welcoming and an inviting environment, just making sure that people are comfortable when they're talking to you, and just making sure the environment, again, is just welcoming and inviting. And then lastly is building connections among one another. So inclusion really looks a lot like friendship. That's like the best way to include people, is to be friends with them. And I'll go more into that into my further slides. So these are a couple of things that inclusion does not look like. It's not part-time. We can't just include people one time and then exclude another. It's not physical placement or like a cluster of a group of people. So we shouldn't be like, oh, well, we have a cluster of people who maybe are of a different race or ethnicity and call that inclusion because they are part, even though they are still in their little group. And inclusion is not a privilege. Inclusion should be just a basic right of somebody. They should have the need and they should feel included wherever they are. Okay, these are some of the benefits of inclusion that I wanted to highlight. So starting from left to right, friendship. So being friends with people of different backgrounds, different identities, different races, and et cetera, stuff like that. They're able to bring such enriching experiences and you learn to value the friendships that you have with people who are much different than you. Improving attitudes. So when you develop those relationships and you are working in those diverse atmospheres, you kind of build this community where people just start, to support each other, to love each other, and to learn to live together overall. With inclusion comes new cultures, like I said before. So getting the opportunity to learn about new foods or maybe new experiences that people like you may not participate in normally, that's a great way to appreciate people and to really make them feel included. Knowledge and perspective. So inclusion usually, or inclusion does involve understanding. So being able to understand one another, to hear each other's perspectives and opinions without being hostile, without feeling attacked, that's a really big part of inclusion. It's just making people feel like they are comfortable and they can talk to you. Competition and collaboration. So when you do start being more inclusive of the people that you bring around you, you're able to have more people participate, bring new perspectives, and you're able to have a lot more candidates for certain roles, positions that may not have been offered before because they were excluded. And then lastly is just decreased prejudice. So when you include people in your everyday life or in groups or in Key Club or whatever, that exposure and that interaction of people with different backgrounds, it kind of decreases the feeling of hate or discrimination because you're able to work with them, you're able to learn from them, and you're able to build friendships with them. Okay. So breaking down inclusion a little bit more, there's 3 parts, and I labeled them the 3 A's. So there's attitude, accommodation, and accessibility. So attitude, keep in mind that inclusion is a feeling. So just making sure that you have a positive environment, that people feel welcomed, people feel like they can speak freely, people feel like they can really be themselves, and just show support for people overall. So accommodation is typically the hardest part of inclusion because it does make you have to work a little bit harder, whether it's providing additional resources, offering different approaches, that kind of thing. It kind of makes you get out of your basic daily routine and really think about what you can do better in order to better accommodate people. And then lastly, we have accessibility. So this, I put a couple questions. Just how easy is it for people to be able to join, participate, and engage in the communities that you are able to participate in? And accommodation and accessibility typically involved expanding, like I said, expanding resources, adding new ones, and just making sure that people are able to join the spaces that you're in. Okay. And then quickly going to go over some inclusion tactics that I find are very valuable. Just look around the people that are around you. Do you feel like they are a diverse group of people in the way they think, the way they act, the way they look, the way they function, how they identify? And then again, foster collaborative and rigorous conversations. So a big part of inclusion is making people feel comfortable to be able to voice both the good and bad of what they go through being different. Keep working. So keep developing new materials, new programs, better policies that are able to incorporate people of different identities and cultures. This is a huge part. Like I said, inclusion is not part-time. It's constant and you always have to work. There's always ways that you can improve the way that you include people. And then lastly, just show support. So support and enhance other organizations and groups that do promote the ideas of equity, inclusion, and diversity. Sometimes I feel like we get pigeonholed with Key Club and we feel like, oh yeah, I am doing service or I am bettering my homeschooling community. But there are so many other different ways that you can go beyond Key Club and really get into these other organizations that try to better the lives of people who are disenfranchised. So that being said, I'm going to pass it over to Brandon.
Hello, everyone. Okay, so I will be covering equity. So also I just wanted to address, we do have a lot of questions. We're going to try and answer that at the end, so just hold on. But yeah, so the definition of equity, it's justice according to natural law or right, specifically freedom from bias or favoritism. This is a super broad definition, and a lot of you, I mean, I would guess just in the day and time that we live in now, know the difference between equality and equity, and the fact that equity gives people what they need rather than giving everyone the same thing. So we're going to kind of cover that in the next, just keep going. We're going to cover the equity basics. So basis for comparison, here's a little chart that I thought was like super just easy to read. So the meaning, equity is the virtue of being just, even-handed, and impartial. Equality is described as a state where everyone is at the same level, which we can't expect everyone to be at the same level. Distribution, so distribution with equity is fair and distribution with equality is even. Equity recognizes differences and attempts to counteract unequal individual opportunities, while equality recognizes sameness and treats everyone as equal. So equity ensures people have what they need, while equality ensures providing everyone with the same thing. So it's kind of redundant information, but I think it just kind of like puts it into perspective really simply. Okay, so equality versus equity. So here's just some examples. A city cuts the budget for 25 community centers by reducing the operational hours for all centers by the same amount at the same times. So that would be equality, everything is treated the same. For equity, the city determines which times and how many hours communities actually need to use their community centers and reduce hours for centers that aren't used as frequently. So again, a very simple example. So the next one is a community meeting where all members of the community are invited about a local environmental health concern, and it's held in English, though English is not the primary language for 25% of the residents. In an equitable circumstance, the community leaders would hire translators to attend the meeting or offer an additional meeting held in another language. So, and the next slide, I have a little bit of just like a picture that we've probably all seen. If you haven't seen it, it's like a really popular example that's used in a lot of presentations about equality versus equity. But as you can see, like there's very obvious differences, and it's clear to see why we need equity in society rather than just equality. So a term that I love using and a very cool concept that I've just like really used in all my leadership positions, and I think that you guys can really utilize this in your leadership experiences, is the equity lens. So an equity lens is a process for analyzing or diagnosing the impact of the design and implementation of policies on underserved and marginalized individuals and groups, and to identify and potentially eliminate barriers. So basically, an equity lens is, in the next slide, is something that you use when you're like, so some examples would be like policy changes, budget reductions and increases. For example, in college student government, if you plan on attending student government in college, you advocate for more funding and you help review the budget and approve it by cooperating with the Board of Education. So that's kind of, and I have previous experience working with a community college through dual enrollment, and that was like a huge thing. So, and another thing is like advocacy, like who are you advocating for? And then like your personal actions. So when you do something, who is it impacting? So some examples, these are like some questions that you ask to kind of like utilize your equity lens. when you're making decisions. So how are processes supporting participants?
Patrice, if you come out here right now.
Huh? How are processes supporting participants' need to be productive and feel valued? Who is affected positively, negatively, or not at all? How will this initiative / plan or element support the empowerment of people from historically marginalized communities? And what are the specific ways that this initiative plan element is expected to reduce disparities and advance social justice? So these are just some example questions you can ask when making any sort of like big decision, and you'll find that you'll actually uncover a lot of inequities or disadvantages for specific people, because time after time we have policies that are put in place that end up only supporting and uplifting the white community, or more specifically straight white men. So next I'm gonna go into kind of like a more specific topic that is very, very relevant to like what, you know, we're going through right now. So I just like to say like Black Lives Matter, and I saw you guys saying that in the chat. I think that's awesome. So continue to advocate, continue to fundraise, continue to educate, continue to have those hard conversations. And hopefully you have been doing your research and putting the time in to make sure that you know what you're talking about, and you are, you know, empathetic, sympathetic, and, you know, fighting for justice. So with that said, racial justice. It's the systematic fair treatment of people of all races that results in equitable opportunities and outcomes for everyone. So racial justice or racial equity goes beyond anti-racism. This is something that has been very, very much broadcasted on social media, that we need to be anti-racist. But it isn't just what we are against, but what we are for. So yes, be anti-racist, but also be pro-racial justice when you're advocating and fighting for rights for racial equity. Okay, so I'm going to go into 4 types of racism, and this is probably something that you have learned about before, and if not, then we're going to cover just some of the different concepts that kind of like describe racism. So to understand racial inequities, we also need to understand the different types of racism, if that makes sense. So the first one, personal. Private beliefs, prejudices, and ideas that individuals have about the superiority of whites and the inferiority of people of color. Among people of color, it manifests as internalized oppression. Among whites, it manifests as internalized racial superiority. Okay, so the next one, interpersonal. The expression of racism between individuals. It occurs when individuals interact and their private beliefs affect their interactions. Institutional. Discriminatory treatment, unfair policies and practices, inequitable opportunities and impacts within organizations and institutions based on race. Individuals within institutions take on the power of the institution when they reinforce racial inequities that routinely produce racial inequitable outcomes for people of color and advantages for white people. And this is something that we have been kind of like focusing on when we're fighting, you know, or advocating towards the government and fighting for policy change. A lot of that has to do with like institutional, when you think of like corporations and kind of like the just policies that keep people of color down under and keep the white community with unfair advantages. So the last one is structural. So a system in which public policies, institutional practices, cultural representations, and other norms work in various, often reinforcing ways to perpetuate racial group inequality. So this is something that kind of goes hand in hand with institutional, but it is slightly different, and it's more focused on kind of like the big picture of it all, of how things that people don't even notice will impact marginalized communities more disproportionately. So it involves the cumulative and compounding effects of an array of societal factors, including the history, culture, ideology, and interactions of institutions and policies that systematically privilege white people and disadvantage people of color. And this is seen time and time again when political policies that are passed favor corporations and businesses that are not for the greater good of everyone in society, whether people know it or not. Okay, so to end the equity side of things, I just wanted to give you some reminders to use an equity lens with decisions that impact others. And this goes hand in hand with whether you're intentionally impacting others or unintentionally impacting others. It's really important to just be self-aware. Self-awareness is huge. Learning about how what you do in your everyday life is impacting other people. And this has a lot to do with even small things like voting with your dollar. What businesses are you supporting? What businesses are you paying that are, advocating for policies that are unfair, or donating to corporations that are actively fighting against groups of people, of human beings. So whether it's unintentional or not, whether you just want, like a chicken sandwich or something, like you have to realize that you have to stop supporting businesses and corporations that are disproportionately impacting others. So the second thing is keep yourself in check. We all have racism to unlearn from the media, relatives, and society in general. This is something that's just deeply rooted in all of us, because when we're growing up, we're, obviously very impressionable, and it is everywhere. And people like to deny that racism isn't everywhere, but it is literally everywhere. And so we grew up in this world. We grew up in a world where there's racial inequities. So as everyone needs to actively unlearn and start learning exactly how to be racially equitable, and how to be anti-racist, and also how to be pro-racial justice. And the last thing is stay woke. I heard someone say that, or I read someone say this in the chat, we need to stay woke. I actually did not know what the word woke meant until a family member told me what woke meant. And it was, it's just like young people being politically correct and, learning the right way of things. So research, discuss, learn, and then research some more. This is super important to educate yourself and to be on top of it and to help people learn as well. Rachel said it perfectly and gave you some really good pointers on how to start those conversations and how to do it without, with the intentions of educating rather than hating. But anyways, that concludes my section. So I think we can move on to the last slide.
Yeah, so I thought it would be cool to include just some like discussion questions, sort of formatting this like a podcast, because as much as we wish all of you guys could speak, there's like 360, so that'd be kind of chaotic. So I thought it'd be good to just talk about some of these things and what we've learned to hopefully give you guys some more perspective. So the first one is, how have you seen diversity benefit an environment that you have been in? Do any of you guys want to go, or do you want me to go first?
I can go first. So at the community college that I dual enrolled for, I was in student government. And one of the things about community college is that you have an extreme difference in ages specifically. And just like as something, ageism is definitely a thing. And one of the things that we learned is that we were advocating for students as, 18, 19, 20-year-olds when we had people going to college at 40, 50, people with children, people who didn't necessarily have the time to be a part of all the events and resources that we offered on campus. And so by bringing in different perspectives and people from different ages and hiring people onto our team that were in those age groups and had voices from a different perspective, it actually benefited everyone, because our events became more resourceful for the student body entirely. And we just saw more student engagement because we started catering to everyone once we started hearing from everyone's voices.
Yeah, for me, my city, we have a big hospital, which is the only reason why my city is slightly relevant in the state of Minnesota. So we recently became super developed, and so we had an influx of a lot of immigrants and doctors coming in. So like we had a big influx of minorities come in, but our school system wasn't able to adjust to it. And so in our classrooms, there's huge discrepancies, and they could have benefited from seeing this workshop, basically is what I'm trying to say. So me and my friends this year wrote some equity policy for our school district, and right after it was implemented, I could see a huge difference already. You know, in our classrooms, you know, there's a lot of different faces in there from different backgrounds. And I've literally seen my friends change this year because of the people that they've been interacting with. I've seen their perspective grow, and it's honestly been really heartwarming for me to see how much diversity has benefited my city.
Okay. My example is just in my dance studio. So last year, a couple of already graduated seniors and I talked to my studio owner about extending scholarship opportunities. She'd already had a nonprofit like set in place for the studio, but it had never really been implemented and it wasn't really active. So we were able to kind of get more money and extend scholarship opportunities for those who couldn't afford dance classes or competition or leotards or any of that stuff, just to make it a little bit easier for them to participate. And so we hosted our fundraiser and we got all of the girls and boys admitted to the studio. And ever since, like seeing a lot of the younger ones like be able to just come in and like not have to worry about anything and just dance for a couple hours before going home, it's really changed my I don't know. I'd say it's just changed my mind just about like, even in terms of starting the conversation to get those opportunities to be put in place. And some of my best friends that I've met through dance couldn't have even gotten there without the scholarship opportunities. So that would be like my tip for the day is definitely start the conversation. Don't be afraid to, because in the end, you're definitely going to help somebody.
Can I go real quick just on the diversity piece?
No, Greg. Of course, go ahead.
Well, this is more for the adults in the room. I just think it's important to understand the emphasis on age diversity. I can speak for myself that working with some of the most talented high school students in the world has really helped shape my perspective. I really honed in on a lot of different pieces as it relates to diversity and inclusion, thanks to the International Board. So always feel free to reach out to those students to have some of those cross-generational conversations, as those are important too.
Thank you. Chef's kiss. Sorry, Greg. Okay.
So we can,
yeah, Brandon, do you want to introduce the next question?
yeah. So examples of equity that you've seen. So I know, like, even in Key Club, we've been a part of a lot of situations where we've had to like be equitable and ask ourselves questions. I kind of want to bring up a project that I really tried to work on for specifically financial barriers. We had developed a subsidy program for international convention, if you've like been able to see that. And obviously it didn't go through because we're not in San Francisco right now, but I think it's just important to realize like how many inequitable systems there are that deal with so many things, and just like specifically financial inequities. By providing those resources, you are inadvertently like supporting marginalized communities through like financial programs like that. So that's like my example that I've seen is just specifically financial barriers, attempting to remove those. Anyone else?
Yeah, I can go. So in my school, again, we got some issues. We have a really disproportionate amount of Black students who get suspensions compared to like the actual number of Black students at our school. And so again, this kind of leads back to my story earlier, but we wanted to make sure that like we broke down that implicit bias that a lot of staff have, because there's not a single staff member of color at my school. We're working on that. But so an example of equity I have is when we sat down with our teachers and we basically trained them on diversity, equity, and like microaggressions and how they can break down the biases that they have, that, you know, they're older than us. They're not Generation Z, so they haven't been as aware of this. So we really just tried to educate them to make sure that they specifically targeted the bias when it came to Black students and making sure that they weren't hurting anyone. So that was mine.
Okay, quickly for me. Something that Rachel kind of like sparked in my brain. So I guess this would have been after Parkland, my sophomore year. There was like a really big like commotion at my school because we're a few hours away, so people were starting to get a little, antsy. So one of the things that a lot of us worked on in student council was kind of creating these, what we called safe spaces. So we started by making stickers and posters, and we put them up in teachers' classrooms, specifically more like the, like obviously the psych teacher, a lot of the English department teachers, but because we did have a little bit of pushback from some of the other teachers. But we started, and again, starting something and continuing to grow on it is also part of this conversation. So we were able to get a lot of teachers to agree to kind of open up their classrooms to be able to have students speak about whether it's things that have been bothering them, or things that they've experienced that make them uncomfortable in school, or talk about safety, mental illness, and all those kinds of things, and just being able to bring those conversations up and giving people the opportunities and the access to talk about their mental health in a safe space was really refreshing. And I hope that we continue to build on that even after I'm gone. So, yeah.
Wait, I have a question. Do we know how much time we have left?
2 minutes. 2 minutes, I think. Do you want me to just like do inclusion real fast?
Yeah.
Question.
Everyone's questions, but if
Questions? I mean, let's just do questions. I'm fine with that.
Okay. So, someone asked me a college question. Guys, this is not the college workshop, but I can answer it if you email me. I feel like politics issue groups make us so divided on issues, which can lead to tension and arguing. How do we go about discussing politics openly in an appropriate manner? If we have controversial political beliefs, should we voice our opinions or hide them in fear of backlash? For this is a really good question. Something I still personally need to keep learning, because sometimes I'm a bit too assertive with my beliefs, and I kind of like just disregard if someone has a different belief. But something that was a lot of growth for me, I sat down with a very controversial guy in my school in the library, and we literally just like talked it out. And I was surprised because we didn't yell at each other. He did call me some names, but I got through it. And just keeping a level head, actually listening to understand and not listening to respond is something that I think everyone can always be improving on. I think that answered the question. But you should voice your opinions. You should never hide them. Just alter the way you present them without compromising them. Yeah. Okay. If someone else wants to take this question, is it possible to discriminate accidentally? For example, a community I'm in has a crayon eater as a playful jab at people who play a certain character, and someone claimed that it was to make fun of autistic people, despite the joke originating with the Marines. Would it be possible to discriminate this way?
I definitely think that it is totally possible, because again, we all have like different perceptions on reality, and we're all impacted by things differently. And that's what I'm saying about the equity lens, because you might be doing something that's completely harmless in your eyes, but it's inadvertently affecting someone in a marginalized group, or someone, like you said, with a disability. So I think that for sure, like, there is a way to accidentally discriminate, but it's really important to learn and correct. And I think that that's what we all need to do. That's what happens with like the unlearning, and it's it is to learn and correct.
Okay, wait, I feel bad about the question I disregarded. It's actually pretty relevant. For their college admissions interview, they want to know their beliefs on opinion, understanding of the current events and racism in America. How do I approach it without sounding too extreme or potentially offending the interviewer, since I will not know their own beliefs? I'm just gonna give you like my personal experience. I just went full on. I told them everything about who I am. And something that the interviewers are told, I know, is that even if they disagree with you, they just want to know if your beliefs are like well thought out, and you're not like the worst thing I think you can do is just say what you think they want to hear. Because I mean, the overarching point of a college admissions interview is to see who you are. So if you're just like lying through your teeth, it's gonna be a double whammy. It's really not gonna help you out. So I would just I wouldn't go like, I hate this group of people on whichever side, but I mean, you should stand your ground. speak your truth, whatever you believe in. So just be honest.
Just to add on, Rachel, real fast. I think a big thing that college admissions officers like is when you're passionate about something. So if your story is what you're passionate about, don't be afraid to share that with them. If anything, it might spark something else. So like what happened with me is I ended up sharing something in my college interviewer, and I had a similar experience. So that was I was like, ooh, okay, thank God. Because at first I was scared, like that she was gonna be like, oh, I'm not sure about this girl. But like I said, just be calm about it, but also like go full forth with it.
So I wanted to answer this one. A lot of people are wondering when the appropriate time to ask people's pronouns are, because I saw a lot of this in the chat when we were going over it. I think that again, like I saw someone say it, like it's more offensive to get the pronouns wrong. And I think it's worse for someone to get offended when you're asking for their pronouns, because that just means that they're not supportive of that. So I think that it's just like one of those overarching things that we should all be open to answering that question and not take offense to it. And again, it's like that unlearning. It's that unlearning of bias and hate that we just need to recognize and not be participants in it ourselves, and be open to people asking that, and also being proactive about asking. So at the beginning is what I would say, like when you first meet someone. Yeah. And I would also like to say, since I never went over it, my pronouns are he, him, his.
Okay, so for our last discussion question, and then we'll wrap this up because we have to go to some caucusing. How have your viewpoints on diversity, equity, inclusion changed in the past few weeks? For me, I think the biggest lesson I've learned is that no matter how educated or understanding I think I am, there's always going to be biases that I have that are deep-rooted. So it's really important to always keep reevaluating your perspective, to keep learning. There's never like this ultimate position that you reach where you're like, yeah, nobody can clock me for being controversial. You always need to keep learning, keep listening to people, and, you know, promote inclusion. So that's my piece of advice.
We have run out of time, so I just wanted to thank everyone for being here. And yeah,
I hope you enjoyed us radicalizing you. Okay, not really though.
Just kidding.
Are just our first and last name with a period in the middle at keyclub.org. So feel free to reach out. All right, have a great day, everyone.
Bye, guys. Kadoosh.